Hello, and welcome back at another tutorial about the wavestate native. In this tutorial we are going to take a look at the modulation matrix. Modulation is a really important feature when you're diving into sound design, because every sound without movement in them can be quite boring, and we don't want that. So let's set up an init performance and quickly create a sound which we can use for modulation. So we know the drill from the other tutorials. Let's load up an init performance. Here we are, and we have the synth to sound again. So let's quickly create a pad sound for this. We are going to select a sample called Interstellar. It's in the synth category. And we are going to use the Clement unison. So we have two samples that we are going to crossfade into each other. Now the first one will be around 5 seconds and the second one will be around 3 maybe. Crossfade is set to time. Let's set the crossfade time a little bit higher so that we don't have a volume drop between them. At least not a big one. So yes. So now we have created a very simple pad sound with two samples, and let's hear it. So now that's finished, and let's look into the modulation possibilities to make the sound more interesting. Well, modulation is basically a source that controls a destination. So if we will do it manually, we will get something like this. But we only have two hands, we also have to play, so let's automate that, and that's called modulation. I'm using the cutoff now as an example, but later in this video we will do much more exciting things. But to explain the concepts, let's look at how to modulate the cutoff knob. Well, most people will use these filter modulations, and I think everyone will know how that works. You add an LFO, and when you hit the notes, you will see that the filter LFO, which is selected over here, based on that frequency, will move that knob for the amount that you selected in the LFO knob. So this is the source that controls the cutoff. So if we slow it down, and if we set the intensity less, it will only use a specific range, and if we set it to max, it will do the maximum. So very easy example, but also really boring, because after 8 measures your brain knows what to expect based on this simple sound. So let's create something which is more interesting. We are going to use the MS-20 filter with a resonance, for instance, for this example. And let's add a random sample and hold LFO. And set it tempo synced and set it to 16 so that it moves quite quickly through these values. So now it's a lot less predictable. So let's add a delay on top of that. Let's see, not the LR. Let's do a stereo delay, for instance, and only the high high frequencies. Okay, that sounds nice, but it always is the same. And let's say that we don't want to do that, and we are going to use the modulation matrix for this. And the modulation matrix is always on the right side of your editor. And what you can do is you can hit the cutoff filter and press the plus button. And now we have the source and the destination intensity, how much of this source you want to assign to that destination. In this case, the cutoff filter. And we are going to select that same LFO, the filter LFO. So basically, we are doing the same as here. So if we set it also to 50, for instance, it will do exactly the same as that we did with this knob. But with this knob, we don't have any control about that. And with this modulation matrix, we do have control about that. So let's say that we want to use the mod wheel to control the intensity of the filter LFO on that cutoff button. So let's do that. Go to the controllers and select the mod wheel. What we did now is when we use the mod wheel at the 0 position, the intensity is also 0. If we move it to the maximum, the intensity is 50 for that. So when we play it now, we have full control with the mod wheel about how much we are going to use the LFO for the cutoff filter. So that's a nice feature, but we can get really crazy with this because if we know this, why not use another LFO to add random values to that intensity knob so that it constantly changes. So in the generator section, we use, for instance, the amp LFO, and we go to the amp LFO, and we now have this value. And when we do it now, you will hear that this pattern at the intensity button. So let's use a random for that too. Or continuous. So you hear now that it's some kind of modulation on that filter knob that you never could do yourself and is constantly changing. So a nice feature to do, but we can go even further. Let's say we want to use a syn LFO on that filter LFO. We have the cutoff, and the amp LFO is still controlling the intensity. So if we use it, you will get that specific movement. So now in a whole measure it will run through this syn. But we also have the phase button, where we can constantly change where it has to start in that syn pattern for the controlling. So why not add another LFO to control the phase? So you see where we are going. The modulation destination is the modulation start phase. So let's add a new source. We are going to use the penning LFO for that. And we are going to say the intensity is something like this. And now we have created an LFO that is constantly moving between different start values when it is applied to that cutoff value. So in basically the sky is the limit, and we can also set the frequency much lower, or even tempo synced, whatever you want. And we can also go back to that standard triangle again. You can get really crazy with this. Okay, and one trick for sound designers is that it's now exaggerated. The movement is way too much. So we are going to lower the intensity to do small kind of adjustments, and that makes the sound interesting. It can be rather subtle. So all kind of movements now, and we can add another layer and do something like a simple pattern on top of it. Set the timing layer to tempo, and we are going to use only one value. We use the 1/8, and we are going to use a bell sound, for instance, crystallize in the bell mallet thing. Yeah. So let's put it up 2 octaves. And let's set the filter envelope on that. Something like this. And we use the retrigger add and step pulse. Well, all explained in the previous tutorials. So let's add the envelope to it. Yeah. Let's add a small reverb on top of it. And also that delay to keep it in sync. Okay, and let's add a pitch pattern. Okay, an 8 lane, 8 cell pattern, well, something like this. Plus 12, plus 7, 12, 0, 12 again. Something like 19 or so. Yeah. And we hear that the crossfade time is set, and we don't want crossfading. Let's create. Okay, so we've created a bell sound on top of that pattern now. And we have to activate sync nodes to keep it in sync. And basically we don't want chords, because when we play it now, sounds way too massive, so we only want mono type of voice, so that it only plays one note, and the lowest note determines which pattern he is going to play instead of the highest note. So you can play major and minor notes, because I use the trick of the root note, the plus 12, so an octave, and a fifth and this is also a fifth. So the third note doesn't matter in this pattern. So that's a good trick to create sequences that runs in major and minor when you use the root note, the fifth, and the octave in pitch lanes. Okay, so we created this. But this is a modulation tutorial, so we are going to use a step sequencer for this, and we are going to create a polymeter. And a polymeter is a lane which has a different amount of cells considering the cells you are running, which are the main cells. So these are 8 cells and these are 3. So every third it runs again that value. And we are going to create random values for this. So the first node is 100, the second is off or a little bit less. So let's hear how that sounds. And we are going to use the step sequencer to the amp level. So let's set that to 0 and add another modulation to that step sequence value. And now with the step sequence lane, so set the intensity to 100 and lower the volume of the amp level to get that effect. You see that it runs now with different volumes. You see when it's 50%, this is the 0 position, minus 100, plus 100. And now we have created different notes at different times, because that minus 100 is sometimes this note, then 1, 2, 3, then this note, 1, 2, 3, then this note. So it's constantly changing. That's called a polymeter. So let's add the delay feedback a little bit higher, a little bit more. So and now we created a pad sound with constantly changing arp notes on top of it. So, and when you play it, you can make all kind of adjustments. So for now, for instance, the frequency is constantly changing based on all those edits we've made. But we can also set a fade, for instance, that it's only get an effect after 4 seconds. And around 4 seconds, it has the maximum effect to do this. So very nice to do, and well, so the sky is the limit, and you can assign anything you want in the modulation matrix of the wave state or the mod wave. That doesn't really matter. So let's say that we want to do this, for instance, for just one value on the pitch lane. Set it to 0. When you select it, you also have a value where you can set the transpose, for instance. And if you select it over there, you can also say, hey, give my my LFO, use one of the LFOs, for instance the panning LFO, and determine the transpose for that. And now when we go to the panning LFO and use a randomizer for that, when you use it now, the pitch is constantly changing. You see the orange button go all over the place. And you can do the same for the step value and gate and now whatever you want. If you want to have more control about the pitch, you can also fit it to a scale. For instance, when you set it to A minor, that's the same as C major, by the way. You can play all kind of chords in white notes and it will always fit. And things like the length of the note, volume, panning positions. Well, there's a lot possible, and it makes your own sounds really interesting when you are going to use and dive into the modulation matrix. So experiment a lot and develop your own signature as a sound designer, because it's what makes your own sounds unique. So I hope this helps, and if you like these kind of tutorials, leave a message or subscribe to the channel, because that way I know that I have to make more tutorials about this. So that's it for now, and hope to see you soon again.